Welcome to the Hot Pot Insights show. I'm Kunkit and I'm here to bring you the perspective and insights of extraordinary people in ordinary lives. A podcast for those who are looking to embark on a journey of discovery and growth. Our next guest is a serial entrepreneur and angel investor who in 2018 had founded an Indian startup accelerator called Origami Next, and the founding partner of a venture builder based in Singapore called V2 Now. V2 Now enabled large corporates to build and fund startups from the ground up and has pivoted during this COVID crisis to be more towards startups itself. So they have been helping mid-sized company to get off the ground, and second, to pivot through seed investments, and as well as providing deep mentor engagement and rapid iteration cycles. Please welcome Rajesh Razdan. Hi, Rajesh.
Hey, Kunkit, thank you very much for having me here. Happy to be here and chatting with you today.
Glad to have you on the show. All right, maybe can you tell us more about your firm V2 now?
Perfect. So V two now, first let me just go and explain the concept of V two. V two is a escape velocity of an aircraft, as you know. So I'm going bit into the science. As the name suggests, so when we coined V two, it was just coined almost like a month and a half before pandemic. So literally like almost the same time last year when I moved to Singapore and set it up. And my Origami Next was like pivoted into V2. Origami was a separate vehicle where I was doing some angel investing, into different tech companies here. And V2 now was a little bit more into a formal and I'll give you a little bit of backstory to V2 as well, which is that, since my founding days, I'll go back to my journey of, my whole career trajectory. I spent 10, 11 years with large corporates, selling for them, marketing for them in different parts of the world, essentially tech. I worked a lot in the telecom and high tech areas. Then when I realized that, and then I did for almost like 10 years, I did my startup, grew it to about 300, 400 plus people. It was a reasonably, um, uh, you know, well-rounded startup, if you will say, profitable second, third year onwards, venture funded, 17 country operations, and finally in the seventh or eighth year, we got exited. We sold it to a Nasdaq listed company in the US. So everybody had a good sort of a cycle of evolution in that sense, if I will. And so we learned a lot. We exited. Some of us made some money. So there was all kinds of check boxes required, and there was a lot of learning, I would say. And I think personally it was a transformational journey for me as well to see that what are the gaps, um, how I fared all those things, and what were the learnings. There were learnings at different steps of the world, literally every time, when we made the first customer to when we went outside of India, and when we were too much into Africa and into Latam and into parts of Asia as well. So that was an amazing journey. Then when I exited after having sold the business, I did a little bit of venture investing for a year and a half, like a very informalish type of venture investing, which was more on angel investment side. Wanted to help these startups and people that I feel comfortable, where I can spend more personal time with them and help them mentor and help them sort of get to the next stage. And that is where some of my friends who are mostly VCs in Singapore, parts of them were at Leo Capital, and I engaged some ideas with them, and they said that we see a lot of um, and this was resonating with me when I was with large corporates, that corporates are too big and they don't know how to respond to disruption that is happening alongside. So we started with the idea that, are we a consulting strategy company? Do we give them a formula purely, and give them a formula like a handbook and say that, hey, here's the handbook and read it and you will know everything about what's happening in the startup? We said no, because we are doers. We are not a McKinsey, we are not Booz, we are not BCGs of the world, because they do a lot of strategy, pure play strategy work, a nice report and nice strategy, and work brilliantly on that area. So he said, let's just go a step below them, where we're saying that, here are the elements of strategy what a lot of people have done, And we kind of went from a top down approach as well as a bottom up. We were more bottom up rather than the top down. We said that, okay, let's look at what are the main challenges that large enterprises face, and which is around the business model. So there are three main things that sort of identified, and that resonates with. So there are two hands. On one side you have the large enterprises, and on the other side you have the startups. And there are three main factors in between. One is the business process itself, like the large enterprises have certain processes which they run with. Then you have the people in between, and then you have the business models. So I think it's a blend of three things: that what are the business models, how people navigate these business models, and what are the processes that get changed. And these processes are the strategies, disruptions, etc. What is the blend of all these things? And then the corporates don't see them like that. The large corporates see in silos, right? They have the finance, they have, let's say, an insurance company will have claims processing, IT, underwriting, etc., etc. All of that. I'm just giving you an example. Now, there are disruptions in each part of the world, and insurtechs, for example, who are collaborating and partnering with some of these large insurers, look for these micro areas of innovation. So I think innovation, which is more of a strategy word, was broken down into rapid iterative business cycles, which was that innovation one is a startup, innovation two is another startup, innovation three is another startup, and all of them can very nicely sort of blend in with the large corporate. So we helped corporates and these enterprises identify those areas, the problem statements that they are facing in their day-to-day life. It's not a 6 months, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year projection strategy. No, we're talking about what are you facing now, today, what are the problems today. And we, through the process of design thinking, iterations, etc., with people, technology, business models, and these principles of innovation, we we started to match them with the respective startups that were doing projects in those areas. So that is how we started as V2. And then that's exactly what we said. We said this is the escape velocity people need, the large corporates or even startups need to actually accelerate their businesses, respective businesses. So as we were executing that, and we went right into the COVID situation. As we started with this, we had some early discussions with large entities in Singapore, and the COVID hit, and suddenly there was this huge this there was this pause. First of all, the first 3-4 months where people were bewildered that what exactly is COVID, and how will this pan out, and what is it, like a short term thing, it'll just go on its own.
Yeah, there's
There
a
are
lot of uncertainty at that period of time.
very, 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 very true. And and people were speculating. So we thought that as and our core was innovation in which ways. We said that while the corporates take time, because corporates also are very archaic, they're also very slow in decisioning. So there was a little bit of a pause because their priority was to actually salvage their businesses from COVID first, and try and save people, be safe. There was those kind of attention. So we sort of, because there was an automatic pause to this innovation agenda, and that time we sort of thought that this is a good pivot to focus on startups, because startups were also going into the same sort of a dilemma, because some of them had raised funds, gotten some term sheets, they were not getting fructified because suddenly the flow of money stopped. And let's say if I was a startup and I was selling to you, and you are a corporate guy, and you suddenly said, hey Rajesh, we're going to pause this for next 2 quarters because my attention is somewhere else. So suddenly, what do I do for the next 6 months, for example? So do I need to pivot? Can I give you something which will help you tide over these situational problems that emerged because of COVID, or do I even have a bandwidth to wait for 6 months? So can I do something else which makes me relevant even during this side of the crisis? So I think there was a forced movement into all those things because of COVID, and we decided that, hey, let's just branch off separately into a startup accelerator as well, where we handpick certain startups and help them grow and navigate all of this. And at the end of the day, as I said, the two hand example, the startups need to come together to the enterprise, and enterprise need to come here. If this hand is slow, this hand is technically very fast, has been inherently very fast, it can go further steps to go and make this meeting happen. So I think we focused on this one, where we said that, okay, let's go and look at the business models which could be now more relevant for startups, for enterprises, to actually do this partnership, etc. And I'll give you an example. Whenever we talked about digital disruption to a lot of these banks and insurance companies and very large manufacturing bases, etc., so they would take their own time because they were brick and mortar, they were distributors, they were shops, they were physical networks, etc. They're While they were very savvy about their running their own businesses, but their response to technology was still very slow. They could not fathom what an Instagram can do, what a Facebook marketing can do, what Google searches, etc., and SEO, simple things of digital transformations can do for them in terms of discovery, in terms of supply chain, in terms of people and processes. So I think with COVID and with I think the digital story and the digital agenda went almost like 10, 20x of pre-COVID days. So I think some of these questions were irrelevant for these large guys because they saw their traditional businesses collapse or dwindle because of COVID, and they were immediately at least responsive to the digital side of things. That hey, that's a good idea. We should get on to this brand wagon of what can you help us do digitally? Can you process automate this? Can you take our marketing and let's do campaigning on digital? Can we just market in different parts of the world? Can we set up online distribution channels, etc.? Can I do virtual things as well? So I think it just did a huge shift in everybody else, and V2 was like right in the crux of it since we were handling both these things. And V2 sort of fell into the right position of helping these startups and getting them to now blend in completely with large enterprises. It's just I would say it's a flip flop of this business models between how we started as corporate venturing, venture building, open innovation type programs to more startup first type of program. So it was a very unique, I would say that it still continues to be a very unique accelerator of its own kind. It's not a classroom type story. We don't have 50 batches, 50 startups or 60 startups, at least not for now. We want to do very bespoke work. We will have 8 or 10 startups in a year, work very closely with them, uh, tie about sectoral things and actually go deeper into those things. And I think I've seen some amazing results coming in with that kind of focus, because then we also feel that we spend more quality time with them, the results are better, and we help them grow what they need to do at this time, when they want to actually tide over this pandemic times and sort of go. And for them it's not really the pandemic was just one blip, but I think the initial 2 3 years are very critical for them till the time they raise their series A and series B, because the concept of V2, and I will go in explaining what V2 is. Essentially, I took a long time to answer that question because I thought I was in the flow. So the concept is V2 is simply because we want to, the relevance of V2 is initially when the startup has gone beyond the ideas, implemented those ideas, gotten some revenues, gotten a bit of a funding, institutional funding, and now they want to look at acceleration. What are the right acceleration pivots, right acceleration models? A Singaporean startup, for example, or an Asian startup wants to come to India, for example, or the rest of the SAARC, or wants to go to the West, or wants to go to the US. Now you may have, let's say, $500,000 in your bank. You've just raised an institution round, or maybe just $1 million. You can't afford to even fathom that, let me hire people in India, hire people in US and Europe. You will hire probably one guy. You don't know how to hire, where to hire, who's the right guy. Should you be hiring directly, or should you have an agent or a distributor? What's the right model, and what kind of guy one should be hiring? Is it in your network? Do you trust that? Let's say you put all your eggs in one guy, and after 6 months he doesn't deliver, or he or she doesn't deliver, then you're not in the luxury of having a lot of capital that you're going to burn on one person. And also, it's not just the capital, the time that you wasted
That's
in
true.
identifying one person, and sort of doing a due diligence enough on the market to say that, hey, it's a good idea to not have a full-time guy, but maybe we can have a distributor or somebody who's an agent or a consultant who will do a little bit of recce for first 6 months, 1 year, and then we will set up a little office. And what is this little micro thing that we should first enter and then do it? So I think V2 helps in all of that. And yeah, so that's the long answer for your what V2 does and the pivot, and how did we sort of move from A to B.
That's great. That's great. So you mentioned about V2 working with a few startups. Um, if any new startups or entrepreneurs would like to work with V2, like usually what are the size that you're looking at? Is it in terms of team numbers or in terms of revenue or number of years they have been incorporated or the number of say clients that they might have? So what are the factors that maybe V2 do look out for in terms of planning to work with any of the startups?
So I think few things that we try and see is we've focused our initial first year has been focused large on enterprise SaaS startups. So we, for example, have lesser appetite to help people who would be, let's say, starting a B2C company, a business to consumer company somewhere. We can connect, but we could add less value to those sort of startup ideas, for example. But enterprise startups, enterprise SaaS startups, deep tech startups in enterprise SaaS are solving a large enterprise type problem, whether they are in fintechs or insurtechs or deep techs or largely tech solving, selling to enterprises is a sweet spot that we sort of identify ourselves with. Now, having said the sectoral thing, um, typically, from a revenue standpoint, it's obviously the startup should be in some sort of a revenue. Our threshold benchmark is roughly about $100,000 type of annual recurring revenue, ARR type of things. They should have ideally raised a $500,000 type of seed round or some sort of an angel round initially, so that there is some validation of the idea that they have. And then it doesn't matter how many team members, one, two founders, three founders, doesn't matter. I think that's a small team size. So I think that's the fundamental way. And the fourth thing that we do is that what are they trying to solve? Because this is also a little bit of a filtering mechanism that we use, and I'll tell you why we use that filtering mechanism. The filtering mechanism is that, is it too much of a me too? Are you the seventh company in, let's say, um, a claims processing? I'll take an example of claims processing in insurance. Are you the seventh company or the eighth company? There are already seven existing. They're trying to solve this problem. Are you the eighth one? So, for example, we will not touch that topic because it's, there's already people are doing it. Then it's very difficult for us to find um, cushion where we can really add value. So, are you very unique in the way you're solving it? There is a uniqueness of that, of course, and the other things that I talked about, the fundraise and the type of makeup that you are in terms of founders and what you're trying to solve. And then we would, I think that's the time when we take and we have 4 5 rounds of interviews with them, with the founders, to sort of see, understand the business model. We also look at how being with us is going to impact them, which is, for example, have you now, let's say you want to go into Indonesia, for example. So why do you think Indonesia is a market, and where are you having problems? Or you want to go to US, or you want to come to India, for example, then what is the problems that you're facing? Have you tried something? Have you hired somebody already? Have you? So it's not about the model just that, okay, I want to go to India, or I want to go to Indonesia, or I want to go to the Europe, but is it part of your plan, and why do you think that that's important for you? So I think it's literally the same process. And why we are very cagey about this program is that, eventually, one of the important points of this acceleration is that we would like to take a certain part of capital allocation into the company, like which is 10% of the round that this startup might raise. So, for example, if the startup is raising after our association, after they join V2 program, let's say they are raising a $5 million Series A round after 2 years. So 10% of that is $500,000. And, that's the kind of allocation we would like to put into the startup as well. So there's a fair amount of commitment that we have. So we've spent a whole lot of time with you for the startup for the 2 years, and we are also putting now our capital. So that means, with some discounts, of course, with respect to the other round. But the point is, our commitment is very important. And we would make sure that the startup is successful. At least strive to make sure it's successful, and then we sort of run into these nice execution cycles of finding them feet on street, the executives, finding them the right connects with the enterprises, getting them there, having them participate in pretty much everything that will get them to make more revenues and all that. So that's the kind of criteria, and that's the way the entry barrier, and that's how we start.
Very interesting. So I think you mentioned about 4 to 5 rounds of interview. I think maybe we can follow up from with that. Is there like maybe for new entrepreneurs or new startups who would like to engage V2, maybe can you give a breakdown in terms of the estimated timeline? Like before, like you mentioned about from the interview all the way until off to the races. Let's get this implemented, get this working out. So usually, what is the timeline that what's the process for V2?
We've kept it very lightweight, even when we have 4 to 5 rounds of these interactions. These generally take place within the 2 or 3 week or 4 weeks range. So from an application stage to 3 to 4 weeks, we conclude the startup that they will going to be part of V2 or not. Because we don't want, because startups have very less time. We don't want them to keep engaged with us and sort of keep hanging between whether I'll be there or not there. So within that 4 weeks, we definitely say yes and no and sort of move from there.
All right. So because I understand from other accelerators in Singapore, they usually do by cohorts by cohorts. So maybe their cohort might range from say June to September. Is this something similar for V2, or do you take on respective startups when they do come in and when you do qualify, of course?
Yeah, good question there, Kunkit. We are still very young in that sense. And as I said that, this is not a typical accelerator where we're doing cohort by cohort. So at least for the initial few years, we are going to take a few. If there is no sort of limit that, let's say if we have five to start with, we'll start with five or three. And but there is a maximum limit. We feel, at least with the current bandwidth that we have, we can't take more than 8 or 9 in a year. And then our program is slightly different again as well, that as I said, these guys, after this cohort is finished, that there is no, you don't really graduate from here. You run this whole cycle for, our first assumption is that you will continue to work with us for 2 years. That's the kind of contract that we sign. And there will be an additional 1 year of mutual understanding, that you still want us to be associated or not. But 2 years is minimum, because depending on enterprise SaaS, and as I said, the selling cycles are different. 3 to 6 months, you
Yes.
need to do some, you need within 1 year, it's too less a time to actually be effective into any situation. And 1 to 2 years just go like this in an early stage startup any which way. So I think 2 years, and then sort of give plus and minus another year to sort of do. No cohorts right now. Small batch, small startups, small batch, and then I think when we see the results coming in, and when we see it's our, we want to be proud of the success rates of people coming to us and sort of working with us, rather than running it into a very classroom style methodology. So it's slightly different. That's why I'm saying that within the whole ambit of various accelerators, this is more like boutique-ish in that sense, as compared to others. It's not a very long format, templatized thing, at least not for now.
Got it. Got it. Um, Maybe the next question is there any misconception in, say, the startup space or for founders that you might have encountered prior to coming to an accelerator?
Prior to coming to an accelerator, I think there are misconceptions in I think there are various misconceptions in general. I think there are the likes of Y Combinators, and Singapore has so many of them, Antlers, etc., etc. Um, I think one misconception is that some of the features. It's not a misconception about the whether you should join an accelerator or not. It's the misconception about the startup itself. Many people, when they join, when they create a startup or get into a startup story, they feel they have arrived, because I think somewhere along the line they forget that their objective is not to raise funds and be successful in how much money have you raised. But I think at the fundamental level, sometimes we forget that our basic idea of starting up was to create a profitable company which would make some difference and which would make some meaning, and that's the reason you sort of decided to do a startup. So I think along this line, depending on who you are, what your business plan is, what your business model is, funding is important. um, I think how do you get that funding? Sometimes people think that, when I get into a YC call or a YC cohort, it's just, I've arrived. And, because it's just an early stage, you have to raise so many rounds, the business models will pivot. So I think fundamentals are very, very important. Um, so misconception of just getting into an accelerator means success is a very big misconception. A misconception of that you should always join an accelerator is also a misconception in my view. I think you have to, each startup has to take different views. For example, when I was starting up, I did not take any accelerator at that point. I did have individual advisory positions to sort of help me at point in time, but not everybody had to go through an acceleration. Depending on, let's say, if you're a single founder or one or two founders and you know very less about some of these accelerators, very less about a certain market, what the challenge you're facing is, then some of these accelerators are important because that's a very small price that you would pay. When I say price, in terms of whether you're giving equity or you're giving some sort of a cash to an accelerator or an advisor, etc., to figure out that 1 year, 2 year program, because the journey of a startup typically is 7, 8 years, 10 years, any which way. So whatever experiment that you're doing in the initial few years is worth it because it'll give you, for a very small price, you're getting a lot of experience. You're able to actually get, for example, to tap into a network of so many people, get advice from them, hear what their insights are. And if the accelerator is actually run by previous founders, that's very valuable because they have seen experience from close quarters. You can have variety of, so one thought is that you can have a very academic style advice, and one is a very practical style advice. And my personal recommendation is to go for practical style advice because that is what the startup founders need. I mean, they
Yeah,
can always read books about how to be a great startup and do all these
yeah,
formulaic things, but suddenly what happens on the ground?
yeah,
How do you defend a situation like that is more important. So
yeah.
those are
Makes
some of the
makes sense.
misconceptions.
Makes sense. Always actionable advice that you can implement the next hour or the next day is always key in terms of, I think, in such circumstances like having the COVID pandemic, or even pivoting through. I think all startups pivots, or test and pivots when necessary. So I think that is really really key to have someone that is able to guide you or give you certain advice on that. I do have a question on between three criteria. So I wouldn't maybe not say three criteria, so more towards three distinct traits that maybe you do see in founders, and which one would be more important, or any if it's, this three is not important, like what else might be important. So the first trait is passion. So their passion for their business, passion for what they are doing. Second is credentials. Maybe they have past experience, they have hired someone, a CFO who is able to scale the business, and maybe greed is the third one. So how are they?
Third
Yeah.
one,
Greed,
Greet.
GRIT.
Oh, the grit,
Yeah,
of course. Okay. Because the passion and grit are together in that sense. So I think personally, I would say passion and grit, determination. Passion is an absolute must. I think passion is like a glue. It's like a really important glue. Every startup, every founders, every founding team, and I would go to the extent of saying every initial employees who are literally the first 10 employees of any founding team should have that passion. I think it's unquestionable, and that passion has to be reflecting from how you, when you meet, when you talk to them, etc. All of that. That's number one. Grit is the second most important thing, and grit is a nice to have factor all along because you will need that grit all along. Whether you have the passion, whether you have the right founding team, or whether you have the credentials, you will need that grit all along. Credentials. I'm kind of divided personally on the credentials. If, for example, you could And by credentials, I think you mean by, let's say, if the CFO or the founder or the main founder has had certain, or has been an ex-founder or has done something successfully in that area. It does help, but I would say that many a times, the whole idea of being an outlier there sort of defeats the purpose of having credentials sometimes. Because when you are looking for only credentials, let's say I chose to fund startups only who have graduates from NUS, for example, or NTU, for example, then I'm kind of, you know, making myself very restrictive in an ideation which can come from anybody. A street guy who has experience of different nature and has a great idea, is extremely passionate about that idea, but is not from NUS or NTU, or for that matter, Stanford, Berkeley, Harvard, can still be very useful. So I think for me personally, passion comes first. Grit is an important thing. Credentials are okay. Even if you don't have credentials, you are very smart. And I think the startups need to be street smart. I think that's a very important focus. If you want a successful startup, you need to be street smart as a founder, founding teams, which means, what does street smartness mean? Street smartness means that you, of course, are passionate and gritty. Second is that you are changing, adapting very fast to the changing business models of what the market throws at you, whether it's a pandemic, whether it is something else, whether it is you want to do something in India, for example, and the political environment is something else. How do you pivot fast? What are the tricks that you have in your bag? And these are tricks of operational tricks, tricks in your product, tricks in your offerings, tricks how you market your product. So I think those are far important things for me as a founder. And I think if the founder continues to do that over time, that defines the grit portion very, very wisely, right? I mean, he is resilient
Yeah.
to sort of make those adaptations very fast. So that is how I, classify these things.
Wow, good to know.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, this is like a off the rule book, and I always say that, and sometimes fortune is always at the bottom of the pyramid, not at the top of the pyramid. So you have to find those small pebbles, and sort of see that, because there's so much vast experience of data and insights hidden in some of those things, which are not found sometimes at the top, because at the top you are very privileged. You haven't really sometimes opened yourself to a whole lot of disruptions, whole lot of experiences. And I think some of the best startups in the world have been all these outliers who have not come from credentials of any sorts, etc. Because if you see the top biggest startups, and they've all been school dropouts. They have not been with the silver spoons in their mouths. They've not been with traditional families and their heirs trying, or their sons and daughters trying to do that startup or bigger business. It's always the outliers, right? The mavericks, and then the people who are outside the box, who generally tend to be successful, because they have so much insights, and with insights they have the grit, and the passion runs so high.
Wow. Maybe to follow up from there, if people do not know where their passion lies, how can they go about this? I think maybe a context is that I've been hearing Gary Vee always mention, like, if when you're young, keep trying different things, like, try different things until you find something that you can really fall in love with. And I think some other entrepreneurs also did mention about when you are working on something that you really love, it's not work. Um, but if you are slogging, and then you consider work. So from there, like, maybe what advice are you able to give any potential or people who might be looking into entrepreneurship on finding their passion?
That's a very good question, Pulkit, and this is a very important question as well. And I think my first advice to people who think that entrepreneurship is very cool and hence we should do it, entrepreneurship versus, let's say, they have as a career, once you're in the early stages of your career after you've studied, etc., all of that, Now you have two choices to make. Join a company and do some work. Whether the company is startup or not is a totally different thing. And the second thing is that you want to join a startup because at the end of the day, you want to do something of your own at some point in time. So I think first of all, this calling has to come in from within. That hey, I want to do something of my own one day. This is like a desire, right? I mean, desire to own a thing, desire to start something. Or some people are very fine with, let's say I want to be the CEO or CXO of this large Fortune 100, 500,000 company, etc., etc., and make my career and navigate, etc. That's like a that's like a common sort of desire. The uncommon desire is that hey, I'm not enamored by that 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 kind of job. It's a well-paying job, well-traveling job, by colleagues and a snazzy office and everything else. But there is something missing. I'm kind of missing something. I don't know. I seem to have a perfect life, but there is something which is missing, and that something is maybe this idea that you don't know what that is yet. So I think that's the time when you start experimenting. And I think I'll give personal example of the same thing, that I did not do my startup immediately when I graduated of my business school or my you know sciences and engineering degree, for example. So I knew that I I was like an open, a clean slate. I didn't know at that time that what's the best thing stored in for me. So I said, okay, let me just go into the flow, in the motion of things, of experimenting. So I joined various companies. They were all great companies. Moved from one to another, learned about people, processes, businesses, and then realized that this is not something for me. I'm not really enjoying it. I'm earning well and I'm having a good life, but there is something else missing. And that is when I finally bumped onto an idea which resonated with me at that point in time. But I think um, to find your passion is, I think it's a very fundamental thing. In order to find something, first of all, you have to step back and say that I'm willing to look. If you're not willing to look, you can't find anything, right? So I think the first step is, am I open to looking, or I am open to just settling? If you're open to settling, you will put your head down and you're settled, right? I mean, then you're not looking out. But if you're not settled, you're looking out, you're finding different things, the chances are that you will find your passion pretty soon. So, and when you're always in pursuit of something, in pursuit of looking, you will find your passion, or you will find your calling, you will find that idea of what you want to do. And when you are in that pursuit personally, and I share that idea a lot, that you always will have this theoretical list going on in your head of um, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, I want to do this. So there are like the don't haves and the do haves. So when you when you meet people, when you get excited about various ideas or situations which you want to contribute to in a certain way, you will always have this thing at the end of the day. Hey, okay, I've thought about it, I don't like this, I don't like, I think there are so many rejections in that thought in your mind, that finally you're left with few choices, or one or two choices or three choices that you like. And I think out of those choices, you can always narrow down to which are those that you really like. I think, and that is true for pretty much everything in life, isn't it? I mean, friends, selection, relationships, everything, right? This food,
Yeah.
I don't like this, I do like this. And you go to that and you suddenly see that I really enjoy that food. I really enjoy that friend of mine. All of that. So I think that's the basic mantra for finding that passion as well. So it clearly, I think it clearly defines certain people who want to feel that, I'm settled, I don't want to look out, I don't want to even, I'm unwilling to experiment. People who are unwilling to experiment, unwilling to change, adaptations, would probably never find their passions. I don't think passion will fall into their laps. Um, they're very rare. But we are talking about the other ones who need to keep looking for that passion, um, and who need to be willing to change, and who are willing to actually push that status quo, that okay, this is done, I want to do something very different here. And that will set the calling button on for everybody.
Wow, that's a good takeaway on that. Wow, I definitely need
Thank
to
you.
think on it. I think we can move on to our quick fire questions. So the questions are short, but your answers can be long or short, uh, respectively. So
Sure.
maybe we can start with something light at the start. So maybe what is your favorite word?
Favorite
Favorite word?
word.
Yeah.
My favorite word is passion.
Passion.
One of I think it comes to me inherently close to passion, and I'm adding close to passion and optimism. Passion and optimism go hand in hand, and I think I'm passionate about things that I do, and I feel um, you got to have passion in life. You have to, you have to first of all have passion for life itself, and from that passion comes various things. The passion transcends into job, relationships, how you conduct yourself, how you treat people, um, basically the whole behavior, the whole attitude, and the whole way and the outlook you look uh, to yourself as well as to you look at others. And uh, and if you have passion, and if you have a certain resonance of passion, the chances are that it will rub off on other people very fast, and you're able to pull them along um, any journey, whether you want to be a great political leader, or you want to be an entrepreneurial CEO or a CEO of large company, doesn't matter. One final thing which will get you, real happiness is passion. And passion is the central theme for pretty much doing everything else. If you lose everything, just don't lose passion ever.
Yeah, I think I get where you're coming from. I think it's what I can see from a lot of top leaders out there is that they have this energy in life, that this energy spills over to other forms in their life or other areas in their lives, be it career, job, relationship as well. So I think what you're mentioning about passion and energy in life is very much correlated. And I think in that sense, it's very interchangeable as well. Wow, very nice. All right, next one. What are you curious about right now?
What am I curious about right now? Um, I'm curious about a lot of things, and I think, let me answer this question in a very different way. Curiosity is the food for passion. So if you're not curious, so I'm curious about okay, one answer is I'm curious about how I am going to transform myself in the next 2, 3, 5 years. What is my personal journey going to be? How can I'm actually, I'm actually very curious about doing things that I've not done in the last 10 years, making impactful decisions which help a lot of people out there. So it comes from the fact that I've done a certain thing in the past. Can I make more meaningful, impactful, um, passionate decisions in the next 10 years um, by being extremely curious about certain ideas, thoughts, people, surroundings, and what comes out of that curiosity and that unknown should be most meaningful. That probably hasn't happened to me before. So I think that meaning comes from that curiosity and the passion that drives it. And that makes, whether now, and I'm applying a slightly philosophical thought to pretty much like a startup or a situation or to whatever you do, that, I've already been there and done that, some of those things. So I want to do at a different scale now. I said that, okay, can I do it at 100x and see what is the impact? And this 100x is not a measure of, do I want to make an 100x money? No, it's not just money's, money is an after effect of when you do things with passion, when you think, when you're curious about certain thing, you do it passionately, you do it well, you do it with the right frame of mind, money will for sure follow. I mean, I have never seen situations where money will not follow, for example. But then there is meaning as well, so in the next 10 to 20 years, do I create meaning by doing some of these large steps? What are those large steps that I can impact hundreds and thousands and possibly millions of people around the world in certain ways? Can I touch their lives in a way different way that I have touched in the last 20 years of my professional life? So I think that is what I'm extremely curious about, finding those answers. And yeah, that's my answer.
Wow. All right, next one. What is the favorite part of your day?
Favorite part of my day is clearly, I walk a lot, I run sometimes, and that sort of is my favorite because that is a reflection time of what I want to do, what I have done in the past. And of course, when you are with family, etc., and I am with family here, and, you tend to get into various things, and sometimes I observe a lot. So I think when I walk, I observe, and I observe my surroundings, I observe everything, what is happening. So clearly that little me time, or sometimes I go out for coffee, while I enjoy time with friends, family, etc., finding half an hour, 1 hour just to myself in a day is very important for me personally. And I've always enjoyed that time, and I always look at that opportunity to spend some time on me with me, because I have to like my own company. If I don't like my own company, it's a big problem. And I try and budget that time always for myself, and I would say that selfishly that would be my best time.
I think it makes sense. It's always about reflection and all this as well. Being able to reflect on what you have done is able for you to go for the next step, right? So I think maybe just a short follow up on that. Like, do you prefer like morning walks, afternoon walks, or like evening walks? Then.
Ideally morning, but I'm ready. I mean, depending on the weather that you are in. Right now, I'm in Delhi, so it's cold here. The weather is you can take a walk in the afternoon. But if I've not taken a walk at all, I would even take a late night walk sometimes. It has to happen. There has to be a me time sometimes. So I think, but yeah, I think it oscillates between the mornings or towards the evening, late evening, rather than the afternoon. Afternoon is fairly less. Because afternoon you have distractions and you have other things as well. Sometimes there are calls, sometimes there are other engagements. You can't say that, hey guys, let me take a walk and I'll do it. So, but you slot that time, and I think end of the day also sometimes is an interesting time because you can reflect on the whole day and you reflect on everything else, or probably in the morning when you can reflect on the previous thoughts that are getting captured in your head. The mind is a little fresh, you're rested. Hopefully, it's not a post hangover walk for sure. It's a different walk altogether.
All right. So, what's your comfort food?
Comfort food. So. I think my comfort food would be I have found this pandemic has done some very interesting thing for me, that I experiment a lot in cooking myself, and I learned a lot of things. I'm reasonably passionate about the food that I eat. I like shopping for that food, ingredients, etc. So I think my comfort food would be rustle up something in chicken, and make something I'm very experimental with food as well, so I like to mix different ingredients, create different sauces around it, throw in some chicken and rustle up something very quick, uh, mix wine in it or mix something else in it, mix some lot of spices in it, mix a blend of I would say a European, Asian, Indian, all kinds of spices, and see what comes out. So it's like a lot of experiment, and that curiosity that I was talking about sort of drove into making all these foods, and sometimes and oftentimes it has turned out pretty well and edible, by the way.
Sounds like a flavor bomb. Would love to try it some
Absolutely.
days.
Bland is not for me.
All right, so maybe next one will be more towards startups and entrepreneurs. Is that is there a universal skill or habit for any budding entrepreneur to learn?
Connect with people. I think one thing which is very common is your connection with your audience, connection with your people, which I think there will be a very rare moment for a hugely successful entrepreneur, even if not successful, a meaningful entrepreneur, where it has disrupted a certain area, and the person or the founder or somebody who's not very social. When I say social, it doesn't mean that you have to throw parties and you have to be at the networking events. That's not what I mean. I clearly mean the connection. When I say the connection, It's about how you connect telling your stories. And I think storytelling is an aspect every founder must learn, how you tell beautiful stories, because stories is all what you have. Even if you have a great product, you're not able to tell the story, the product is meaningless. I think the biggest stories example is probably none other than Steve Jobs, starting from what he created and how he told the stories. So I think every founder who wants to get into this business, who wants to be successful, should ideally be a storyteller. You have to learn the art of telling stories. You have to learn the art of weaving those anecdotes into a very compelling storytelling aspect, which will resonate very well with the audience, and how you connect with people. You connect with people who could be your founders, investors, employees, customers, and people at large. So I think that one aspect is unequivocal in terms of a must have um, criteria.
All right, nice. The last one would be if you could have dinner with any three people, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Wow, I mean, it's a very interesting and long list of people, though. I would have loved to have the opportunity to having dinner with Steve Jobs. Um, the question, but Steve Jobs is an iconic personality. I mean, why would anybody leave that chance of having dinner with him, for example? My personal reason is a bit different. So I would have asked him, or I would have tried to learn from him that what was going on in his mind when he was creating the first MacBook. And more interestingly, when he designed the first iPhone, how did he have the vision of what transformed, or what sort of inspired him for a vision to see 10, 20 years and seeing that, this is exact, almost he went with that kind of mad passion to sort of see that the touch screen and the whole interface of UX will drive the world crazy. How can one, was it just a fluke, or what are the guiding principle which led him to believe in all of that? I was very curious about that. I'm less curious about how you transform one iPhone to a 2 or a 3 or a 4, because that's an evolution process. But the first leap of faith, because I used to work for Nokia at some point in time, and Nokia was decimated, and then iPhone came in. So I
Yeah.
was like, one guy, he did all of that is kind of truly transformational. I think one would be Steve Jobs for these reasons. The second person that I would have loved to sort of have dinner with is probably Mahatma Gandhi. Um, and the reason for that is I wanted to ask him, or I would have loved to know uh, how he navigated the entire freedom movement, non-violence story in this hugely violent world. Some of those theses, if there was a Gandhi today, can there be a Gandhi 2.0 or a 3.0 relevant in today's world, in today's time? Because we're talking about Gandhi when he died in 1948 or something like that. So would he be still relevant 50, 60 years from when he died in today's time and age? Can there be a Gandhi in today's time and age? Because now it's not about the Gandhi as a person, but Gandhi as a philosophy. So I'm very curious about that philosophy that can drive a very different type of world. So I'm very curious about that, and that I would have asked him for sure. Third person would there are two dead people now, so the third person needs to be somebody alive. Who could that be? And I think the third person could be Lionel Messi, the footballer. So I want to ask him if I have dinner with him. That's besides the fact that my son is an ardent fan of him, and maybe I'll take him along. But the thing that I want to ask Messi is consistency of the passion. I want to talk to him about passion, that for 20 years that he has played football and consistently delivered. Is there is there, I want to learn more about how he thinks when he sleeps, how he thinks there's a lot of pressure when you are hugely successful footballer, or for example a media person, or a singer, for that matter, anybody. So what drives his day-to-day life? How does he negotiate with A, success, and B, expectations? I think negotiating with success is still easy, but how do you negotiate with expectations? And the reason I say there are a lot of successful, and I mean, I can ask the same question to Jeff Bezos as well, but Messi and Bezos are two very different people, because when you judge, when you look and then you judge, and when you look at a Bezos, you don't, you look at him at a horizon of spaces. I mean, you look at him for a long time in that sense, right? When you look at Messi, the expectations are for that 45 minutes or 90 minutes of game. It's a very short-lived expectation. After that game, he's kind of over in that sense. But within that 45 minutes or 90 minutes of game, you make or break that person that you have in head, right? I mean, if he doesn't perform, you kind of decimate him, that he's lost the touch, etc., etc. And when he delivers again, then you're again in love with him. So how do you handle those spikes that come very uniquely to a sports person? Because sports teaches you a lot of things. Sports teaches you emotions like no other business does. So I'm very curious to know about that from Lionel Messi. So
Wow,
these are the three answers.
wow, wow, wow. That's very impressive, an impressive list. Maybe lastly, before we close off, is there any parting advice that maybe you would like to give to any budding entrepreneurs or startups out there right now?
So I think for the startups, which are early stage startups, the ones that need sort of that advice in that sense, I'm assuming that people who are well on that ground are already on that journey to do something or the other. But people on the early stage startups, I think the point is the reflection. Do not get too enamored um, by the rounds of capital that you may have raised or just recently raised, because there is sometimes I call this capital as fluke capital as well, capital by fluke. Because what happens is that, let's say it's a certain hot area and you happen to be there at the right time, at the right moment, you get a little lucky sometimes. But I think many startups, many founders actually, who you know reach that curve, are blinded by the success or the days of the capital raise that has happened. They are also blinded by the adulation they receive in media and press and everything else about, hey, you're going to be the next Steve Jobs, etc., etc. I think in that dazzle, many times people lose their plot. They lose important people. They don't know how well to execute. They are too dazzled in that success, and I think that's where a certain amount of groundedness comes in. You always reflect that. You never dispute your fundamentals of why you started, how you started, and the fundamentals of business, in spite of um, you know how the surroundings are actually telling you to do things, in spite of those. Because what happens is, when you as you go along that path, there are too many distractions from investors largely, distractions from shareholders largely. So there are hardly any distractions from the customers, and people tend to lose that focus. They focus more towards shareholders and investors rather than less towards the customer. So companies that have always focused on customer first, or their own people, or employee first, or team first, or customer first strategy, I think they are the long ones to watch out for. They will never be distracted from that. So that would be my advice for startups. My advice to budding founders, or wannabe founders, is that make a difference. I mean, if you have a slight bit passion about changing the status quo, this is the time. Whether you are a 25-year-old young wannabe startup, or whether you are a 35 or 45-year-old experienced, seasoned executive wanting to do something of your own, there is never a better time. Do not think about whether you're too young or too old. Just jump right in, and if your passions and your inclinations are aligned, you will find your way. If not the first time, the second time. If not the first year, the second year, the third year. But there's no better passion to sort of do it now rather than any time later in life. And I think there is always a learning. And this is not a race, this is a long transformational journey. And oftentimes, a startup, when startups it's like a cocaine of sorts, right? I mean, it's like intoxication. So you will continue to do that if you do it the right way, and then there is no looking back, and make some meaning and make a life out of it.
Nice. So, Raj, where can the audience find you online?
I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on Insta, so I think the best social network is LinkedIn. And and maybe after a year and a half or two, I might start a blog or whatever. But I think LinkedIn will have pretty much. I mean, my own social handle is typically on LinkedIn. Yeah, it's Rajesh Razdan. Raj is my short and convenient name, so you can always reach out, and I'll be happy to connect there.
I'll put that in the comments or the show notes itself. All right, thanks, Raj, for your time and your insights into this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kunket. I truly enjoyed it, and all the best to you. And look forward to some more sessions or any help that you need from me.
Likewise. All right, thank you.
Very much. Have a good one.
Hey, thank you for listening to my interview with Raj. Here are my takeaways. 1. The objective of the business is not to raise funds, but fundamentally to create a profitable business while making a change. 2. Having a me time. 3. Be grounded, be humble, and focus on the fundamentals. Generally, customer or team-centric strategies will empower startups in the long run. Do let me know your takeaways from this hot pot mix of insights. Cheers!